The engine roared beneath him, but Takeshi Yamamoto heard nothing. His hands rested on the control stick of the Mitsubishi A6M0, yet they felt distant, as if belonging to someone else. Around him, 11 other young pilots sat in identical cockpits, their faces hidden beneath leather helmets and goggles. None of them spoke. The silence was heavier than the bombs strapped beneath their wings. It was April 6th, 1945. The sky above Kyushu Air Base stretched endless and blue, mockingly beautiful for what was about to unfold. Takeshi's commanding officer, Lieutenant Hayashi, stood before the assembled pilots, his weathered face carved from stone and duty. Behind him, mechanics made final adjustments to aircraft that would never return. "Today," Hayashi began, his voice cutting through the morning air, "you become the divine wind. You carry the spirit of Japan itself. The American fleet gathers near Okinawa like wolves circling wounded prey. You will be the blade that cuts their throat." Takeshi's stomach tightened. He had heard this speech before, watched other pilots receive the same words, the same ceremonial sake cup, the same white headband inscribed with rising sun symbols. Those pilots never came back. Their photographs now lined the wall of the operations room, young faces frozen in time, forever 20, forever 19, forever 18. He was 22. In another world, he would be graduating from Waseda University this spring, his literature degree finally complete. His mother had been so proud when he was accepted. She worked double shifts at the textile factory to pay his tuition, her fingers bleeding from the looms, her back bent from years of labor. His little sister, Yuki, only 14, would bring him tea while he studied late into the night, asking him to read her poems he'd written. That world ended on December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor. Then came the draft notice. Then came flight training. Then came the day Lieutenant Hayashi pulled him aside and explained the Tokubetsu Kogeki Tai, the special attack unit, the Kamikaze. "Yamamoto." Hayashi's voice snapped him back to the present. "Step forward." Takeshi's legs moved automatically. Years of military training had programmed obedience into his muscles. He stood before his commander, back rigid, eyes forward. Hayashi held out a small ceramic cup filled with sake. "For the Emperor, for Japan, for your family's eternal honor." Takeshi took the cup. The liquid was warm, sweet. He drank it in one motion, the alcohol burning down his throat. Around him, the other pilots watched, their faces masks of forced composure. Some of them were 17, children playing at warriors. "You have been selected for this honor because of your exceptional skill," Hayashi continued. "Your training scores are among the highest. Your dedication is unquestionable. Today, you will strike the carrier USS Essex. Intelligence reports place it at the center of the enemy formation. One plane, one out ship. Your death will save thousands of Japanese lives. One plane, one ship. The mathematics of sacrifice." Takeshi had stopped trying to make it make sense weeks ago. "Dismissed. Prepare for departure at 0600 hours. You have 1 hour. 1 hour. 60 minutes. 3,600 seconds. Takeshi walked toward the barracks, his footsteps echoing on concrete that still held morning dew. Other pilots dispersed in different directions, some toward the shrine for final prayers, others to write last letters, a few simply standing alone, staring at the sky they would soon die in. Inside the barracks, Takeshi's bunk was exactly as he'd left it. Perfectly made, military corners crisp, personal items arranged with precision. On the small wooden shelf beside his bed sat 3 objects: a photograph, a book of poetry, and a half-written letter. The photograph showed his mother and sister, taken 2 years ago during his last leave. His mother's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She already knew what was coming. Yuki grinned broadly, gap-toothed and innocent, holding up a paper crane she'd folded for him. Behind them, their modest house leaned slightly to the left, weathered but still standing. Takeshi picked up the letter. His handwriting covered the thin paper, characters flowing in the classical style his calligraphy teacher had drilled into him as a child. He'd started it 5 days ago, after receiving confirmation of his mission date. 5 days of trying to find words that could contain everything he needed to say. He sat on the bunk and read what he'd written. Dear Mother and Yuki, when you receive this letter, I will have fulfilled my duty to the Emperor and our nation. Please do not grieve. I go willingly, with honor and pride. The cherry blossoms are falling early this year. I watched them yesterday, remembering how we used to collect petals in the park when Yuki was small. She would fill her pockets until they overflowed, scattering pink wherever she walked. The words felt hollow, rehearsed. They were what he was supposed to write, what censors expected to read, what would bring his family honor instead of shame. But they weren't true. Takeshi picked up his pen. His hand trembled slightly, 37 minutes remaining. He continued writing. I am afraid. I know I should not admit this, but if I cannot be honest in my final words, then when? I am afraid of the pain. I am afraid of failing. I am afraid that my death will mean nothing, that the war will continue, that you will suffer whether I crash my plane into an American ship or not. Mother, I remember you told me once that a man's life is measured not by how he dies, but by how he loves. I have loved you both more than words can express. Every sacrifice you made for my education, every meal you skipped so I could eat, every night you worked until your hands bled. I saw it all, and I carry that love with me. Yuki, you asked me last year what I was fighting for. I told you for Japan's glory. But the truth is simpler and more selfish. I am fighting because I was told to, because refusal means disgrace, because the choice was made for me long before I understood what choice meant. If I could choose, I would choose to come home. I would choose to see you graduate from school, Mother. I would choose to teach Yuki how to write proper haiku, to walk with you both through the cherry blossoms one more spring. I would choose life, but that choice is not mine to make. He stopped. Outside, an engine coughed to life, then another. 15 minutes. The words blurred on the page. Takeshi wiped his eyes roughly, ink smudging on his fingers. A knock on the doorframe. Yamamoto-san. Takeshi looked up. Corporal Tanaka stood there, barely 18, his face still soft with youth. He was also flying today. His hands shook as he held them behind his back, trying to hide the trembling. Are you scared? Tanaka asked quietly. The question hung between them. Honesty or duty? Truth or comfort? Yes, Takeshi said. Terrified. Tanaka's shoulders sagged with relief. I thought I was the only one. I thought something was wrong with me. Nothing is wrong with you. Being afraid means you understand what you're losing. My mother doesn't know, Tanaka whispered. I told her I was assigned to defend the home islands. I didn't want her to know I would. He couldn't finish. Takeshi stood and placed a hand on the younger pilot's shoulder. She will be proud of you regardless. That's what mothers do. Will it hurt? The impact? I don't know. I hope not. They stood in silence. Outside, Lieutenant Hayashi's voice barked orders. 5 minutes. Takeshi folded his letter carefully, slipped it into an envelope, and wrote his mother's address in precise characters. The mail would deliver it after his death. After the radio confirmed his plane had struck its target, after his name was added to the wall of photographs. He picked up the poetry book, a worn collection of Matsuo Basho's haiku. His professor had given it to him as a graduation gift back when graduation seemed inevitable. Takeshi flipped to his favorite verse, the summer grasses, all that remains of warriors' dreams. How many warriors' dreams had already become summer grass? How many more would follow? It's time, Tanaka said softly. They walked together toward the airfield. Other pilots emerged from barracks, from the shrine, from the shadows. 12 young men converging on 12 aircraft. The mechanics stood at attention, their work complete. Lieutenant Hayashi waited beside Takeshi's Siro, holding the traditional Hachimaki headband. Yamamoto, are you ready to serve your emperor? Yes, sir. The lie came easily now. Hayashi tied the headband around Takeshi's head, the white cloth tight against his skull, the red rising sun positioned directly over his forehead. Your family will receive compensation. Your name will be honored. Your sacrifice remembered. Compensation. As if money could replace a son. As if honor could fill an empty chair at dinner. Takeshi climbed into the cockpit. The seat was hard beneath him. The instrument panel familiar from hundreds of training hours. But this time, the fuel tank was full. This time, there was no practice landing ahead. This time, The bomb beneath his wings was live. He strapped himself in, the harness crossing his chest like an embrace. The mechanics had painted a small cherry blossom on the side of his cockpit, a final touch of beauty before death. Lieutenant Hayashi approached with a small wooden box. Inside, wrapped in silk, was a lock of Takeshi's hair. It had been cut this morning during the ceremonial preparation. If his body was never recovered, when his body was never recovered, this would be buried in his place. "May the gods guide your path," Hayashi said, bowing deeply. Takeshi returned the bow from his seat. Then Hayashi stepped back, raised his hand, and dropped it sharply. "Engines start!" 12 engines roared to life simultaneously. The sound was deafening, overwhelming, drowning out thought and fear and everything except the vibration of machinery. Takeshi's hands moved through the pre-flight check automatically. Fuel mixture, rich. Magnetos, both. Oil pressure, rising. Throttle, set. The control tower's green light flashed. One by one, the Kamikaze planes began to taxi toward the runway. Takeshi was third in line. He watched the first Zero accelerate down the concrete, its tail lifting, wheels leaving the earth, climbing steeply into that impossible blue sky. The second followed. Then it was his turn. Takeshi pushed the throttle forward. The engine screamed. The plane surged ahead, faster, faster, the runway blurring beneath him. At 120 kilometers per hour, he pulled back gently on the stick. The nose lifted. The ground fell away. He was flying. The wind buffeted the canopy as he climbed. Below, the air base shrank to miniature scale. Toy buildings, toy people, toy lives. Ahead, 11 other Zeros formed up in loose formation, their wings catching sunlight like mirrors. Takeshi took his position in the formation, matching altitude and speed. The radio crackled. "Kamikaze unit, maintain heading 135. Target distance, 240 kilometers. Estimated contact, 45 minutes. May your deaths bring glory." 45 minutes. Takeshi glanced at his watch. 6:47 a.m. By 7:32 a.m. he would be dead. The coastline appeared ahead, Japan's green mountains giving way to endless blue ocean. They crossed over the beach, leaving land behind. Below, fishing boats dotted the water, their crews pausing work to shield their eyes and watch the formation pass overhead. Did they know? Did they understand what they were witnessing? The ocean stretched forever. No landmarks, no reference points, just water and sky bleeding together at the horizon. Takeshi's hands gripped the control stick, his body tense despite hours of training to stay relaxed. The bomb beneath his plane weighed 250 kilograms, enough to tear through a carrier's deck, enough to kill hundreds, enough to justify his death, except it wouldn't justify anything. Takeshi had seen the reports, the ones Lieutenant Hayashi tried to hide. The American fleet was massive. Hundreds of ships, thousands of aircraft. Even if all 12 kamikazes hit their targets perfectly, it would barely slow them down. Japan was losing. Everyone knew it, but no one could say it. The radio crackled again. "Enemy fleet detected. Bearing 140. All units prepare for attack run. Remember, death before dishonor. There is no turning back." Takeshi's heart hammered against his ribs. His mouth was dry. His hands were sweating inside his gloves. There is no turning back, but what if there was? The thought arrived unbidden, unwelcome, undeniable. What if he simply didn't? What if he turned his plane around, flew back to base, landed, and refused? Court-martial. Execution, probably. But execution meant a bullet, quick and clean, not burning alive in a plane crash. And his family, they would be disgraced. His mother would lose her factory job. Yuki would be expelled from school. They would be marked as relatives of a traitor. No, there was no turning back. Ahead, the formation leader wagged his wings. Enemy contact. Takeshi strained his eyes against the glare and saw them. Dark shapes on the horizon, geometric and wrong against the organic chaos of ocean waves. Ships, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, spread across the water like a steel net. The American fleet. "All units, select targets and begin descent. Attack at will. Long live the Emperor." The formation broke apart, each pilot choosing his death. Takeshi watched as the plane to his left, Corporal Tanaka, nosed down sharply, beginning his dive toward a battleship. The 18-year-old kid who shook with fear 20 minutes ago was now accelerating toward oblivion at 500 kilometers per hour. Takeshi's turn. He had to choose a target. His eyes swept across the fleet. There, a massive carrier, exactly as intelligence described. The USS Essex. Its deck was crowded with aircraft, tiny ant people moving between them. From this height, it looked peaceful, a city floating on water. He pushed the stick forward. The Zero's nose dropped. Gravity pulled at his stomach as acceleration built. Wind screamed past the canopy. The altimeter spun backward. 4,000 meters, 3,000, 2,000. Anti-aircraft fire erupted from the fleet below, black puffs of smoke appearing in the air around him. A shell exploded 50 meters to his right, the shock wave rocking his plane. Another burst ahead, another behind. The Americans had seen them. 1,000 meters. The carrier deck filled his entire view. He could see individual people now, running, pointing, manning guns. Tracers arced up toward him, bright lines of light seeking his wings, his engine, his body. 500 meters. His finger moved to the bomb release. One more second, one more breath. Then he saw her. On the carrier deck, among the running sailors, one figure stood frozen, a young man, maybe 25, staring up at the kamikaze plane diving toward him. His mouth was open in a silent scream. His arms were raised, not in defense, but in a gesture of pure animal terror. He looked exactly like the American students Takeshi had studied with at university, back when America and Japan were still at peace, back when they shared meals and argued about poetry and laughed about nothing, back when they were just people. This sailor had a mother too, maybe a sister, maybe someone at home who made him promise to be careful, to come back alive. Takeshi's hand froze on the bomb release. 300 meters. Tracers shredded the air around him. A shell fragment tore through his left wing, punching a jagged hole in the metal. 200 meters. He could see the terror on the sailor's face clearly now. Could see other faces too, all of them young, all of them afraid. 100 meters. Takeshi's mind split into two voices. The first voice, duty, honor, training, empire, screamed at him to release the bomb, to complete his mission, to die as he was supposed to die. The second voice, quieter, deeper, his own, whispered, "You don't have to do this." 50 meters. His finger was on the release. One tiny movement. One last action. Instead, Takeshi yanked the control stick hard to the right. The Zero banked violently, G-forces crushing him into his seat. The carrier deck flashed past his left wing, so close he could have touched it. Anti-aircraft guns tracked his movement, tracers following like deadly fireflies. A shell exploded directly behind him, shrapnel peppering his tail, but he was past the carrier, past the fleet, flying toward empty ocean beyond. The radio exploded with confusion. "Yamamoto, what are you doing? Return to target. This is a direct order. Yamamoto!" Lieutenant Hayashi's voice, furious and disbelieving. Other pilots calling out, some hitting their targets, explosions blooming across the fleet, black smoke rising like funeral pyres. Takeshi kept flying. East. Away from the fleet. Away from Japan. Away from everything. His fuel gauge showed half empty. Maybe 40 minutes of flight time remaining, not enough to reach Japan, even if he wanted to return, not enough to reach anywhere. But it was 40 more minutes of life. The radio continued to scream at him, but Takeshi reached down and switched it off. Silence filled the cockpit, broken only by the engine's steady roar. He was alone now. Truly alone, suspended between sky and sea, between life and death, between honor and choice. He thought about Corporal Tanaka. Had the boy hit his target? Was he already dead? What about the others? He thought about the American sailor who'd stood frozen on the carrier deck, watching death dive toward him, then veer away at the last second. Would he ever understand why? He thought about his mother and Yuki. The letter would still be delivered. They would still receive news of his death, but perhaps someday, somehow, they would learn the truth, that their son their brother, had chosen mercy over murder in his final moments. The sun climbed higher. The ocean below reflected light in a million directions. Takeshi's fuel gauge dropped steadily toward empty. He had perhaps 20 minutes left now. The engine would sputter, cough, and die. The propeller would stop spinning. The plane would glide for a while, then fall. The ocean would swallow him whole, and no one would ever know where he went. But he would know, in these final minutes, he would know that he had chosen. Takeshi thought again of Basho's haiku, the one about warriors' dreams becoming summer grass. But there was another verse he loved, one about choice and consequence. Even in Kyoto, hearing the cuckoos cry, I long for Kyoto. Even while doing what he was supposed to do, being where he was supposed to be, he had longed for something else, something true, something his own. Now, with fuel running out and death approaching, he had finally chosen his own path. The engine coughed, sputtered, caught again, coughed harder. The propeller's rotation slowed, the steady roar becoming a broken rhythm. Takeshi smiled. He had been afraid of pain, afraid of failure, afraid his death would mean nothing. But this death on his own terms and in defiance of orders and empire and the machinery of war, this death meant everything. The engine died. Silence. Perfect silence. The propeller stopped, and the Zero became a glider, sleek and peaceful, descending gradually toward the water that waited below. Takeshi closed his eyes and thought of cherry blossoms, of his mother's tired smile, of Yuki's gap-toothed grin, of poetry and possibility and all the springs he would never see. The ocean rose up to meet him. In his final second, Takeshi Yamamoto was not a kamikaze pilot, not a tool of empire, not a divine wind. He was simply a 22-year-old literature student who loved his family, wrote poetry, and chose mercy when the world demanded murder. The Zero touched the water gently, almost tenderly. The ocean claimed him whole, pulling him down into darkness and silence, where warriors' dreams dissolve into salt and memory, and summer grass grows over everything. On the carrier deck of the USS Essex, a young sailor named Michael O'Brien stood trembling, staring at the empty sky where a kamikaze plane had been. He had watched it dive toward him, watched death approach at impossible speed, watched his entire life compress into one terrified heartbeat. Then, impossibly, the plane had turned away. Michael would think about that moment for the rest of his life. He would wonder who the pilot was, why he had chosen differently, what it cost him to turn away. He would never know the pilot's name, would never read the letter that was delivered to a small house in Kyushu, where a mother and sister wept over words about cherry blossoms and love and fear and choice. But in his heart, Michael O'Brien understood what had happened. One person, in one moment, had chosen to be human instead of a weapon. And in the vast machinery of war, grinding millions to dust, that single choice mattered. It had to matter. Otherwise, what were any of them fighting for? The summer grasses grew, the warriors' dreams faded. But somewhere in the space between duty and defiance, Takeshi Yamamoto's choice remained. A small rebellion, a quiet mercy, a young man's final poem written in sky and salt, and the terrible, beautiful act of saying no.